I got sent this guitar kit from Lyxpro to do a review of. This specific kit retails at $160. In general, I'm a fan of these style guitar kits because with a little bit of know-how and maybe a couple modifications, they have a lot of potential. But it's also important to understand what you're going to get out of something at this price point. So stay tuned and we'll be going over this guitar, all the setup, modifications, and fixes we did. And once we get this set up and playing nice, we'll be donating it to a local lesson academy and getting it in the hands of a student. So a special thanks to Lyxpro for providing the gear in this video and ultimately supporting music education. The guitar certainly looks the part out of the box. It has a cool transparent red finish that shows the wood grain and a matching amp. Upon inspecting this guitar, there are a couple issues that are all pretty normal in this price point. The back of the guitar has some bubbles in the paint and some cosmetic defects. The only major issue I noticed in this specific guitar was that it was missing a screw for one of the bridge saddles completely. I looked around in the packaging and couldn't find it. Fortunately, I have replacement parts as I do projects like this pretty often. This is something a beginner might not know how to address properly, so it's definitely a bigger issue. On a positive note, this was the only major issue I noticed in the guitar. All the other things I changed were to enhance the instrument, its tuning stability, or fix cosmetic issues. This of course comes with all the accessories you might need to get started, like a gig bag, an extra set of strings, some basic instructions which go over things like the truss rod adjustment, which is nice to see, a clip-on tuner, a cable and some picks, the Allen wrenches you need for adjustment, and a strap. It goes without saying that none of these are particularly high quality, but these are things that should be included in a starter guitar kit like this. It also comes with the matching amp as mentioned before. For its size, this amp gets plenty loud and sounds fine. One weird thing I noticed is that the control layout didn't match the images on the website. The labeling is correct and all the knobs do what they're supposed to, so I just switched the red knob to the volume control to make it a little bit more consistent. Another positive note was that the tuners are actually pretty good on this guitar. It's not uncommon at this price point to have jumpy or stiff tuners, and these fortunately required no replacement. One thing I replaced while I was up here were the string trees. These help provide enough tension on the strings to keep them in the nut slots. The ones that came with this guitar are just bent pieces of metal and have potential to cause the strings to get caught up as they move. And I replaced them with some extras I have that have a little bump out in them to help alleviate any issues. Another pleasant surprise was that the nut was actually cut very well, with all the grooves being cut to the correct depth for the strings. I did replace this with a bone nut, mainly because I had one laying around, and it will help with the tuning stability, but the nut that came with this guitar would have worked fine. Next was one of the stranger issues I've experienced. Most of the strings were stuck in the back of the trem block, and I couldn't get them out without using a rubber mallet and a tool, and I was surprised with how much force it took to get some of these out. This is something that would also be a pretty big issue, as a beginner probably wouldn't want to take a hammer to their guitar the first time they changed their strings. Regardless, I did get the strings out, I lubricated everything, and I used this opportunity to replace the bridge saddles with these roller style ones that I like. Now we'll get into what was the most intensive work I did on this guitar. While the guitar played out of the box, the action was a little high and the experience was a little uncomfortable. This guitar had a pretty common issue called fret sprout, which means from the time the neck was made, the wood has dried out a little bit more and shrunken, leaving some slight edges on the fretwork which scratch your hands as you play. And as I lowered it and adjusted the truss rod, it became clear that there were a couple frets that weren't level, meaning that some of the frets were just slightly taller than the others, causing some notes to buzz as you played up and down the neck. I addressed this with two tools, one being a file that has both a flat and a serrated end so you can file the frets without marring the fretboard, and this curved file from Fret Guru designed for fret leveling. While this was a little bit more intensive and not necessarily required, it will ultimately make the guitar play and feel a lot better, which is good for whatever beginner ultimately uses this. And I was pretty happy with the results. While the strings were off, I took off the pickguard and inspected all the electronics for any potential issues. While the electronics were cheaper, there were no issues with solder joints or anything that needed to be rewired, which is a plus. For what I got, I'd say this guitar is a pretty standard example of what you might expect to get in this price point. It was dirty out of the box, for example, and needed a setup. It also had some issues we had to fix along the way. There were also some things that surprised me, like the strings which were wound with extra care to not have any edges poking out. All in all, with a couple hours of work, this guitar definitely plays, looks, and sounds like a Strat should. And I'm excited for whoever ends up getting it and whatever future it has.